Hello and welcome to the next of our videos on NewsMatch 2025 and how to get the most out of it. Today we're going to be talking about maximizing your matches, specifically in the context of NewsMatch, but really for any campaign or any point in the year where you have someone who is willing to match the gifts that your readers make. If you haven't seen any of these videos already, my name is Will Warren. I am the Senior Revenue Growth Specialist at the News Revenue Hub. We're a nonprofit that supports newsrooms in building sustainable business models, be it through audience development or fundraising. And today we're going to be talking about your matches. And when we think about maximizing a match, I think it's useful to think about what the different aspects of a match are that are valuable and how you can maximize each of these because they're all relevant and they're all important. The most obvious of these, of course, is that matches provide funding to you. This is, I think, very intuitive, but this is funding that can further your mission and sustain your work. They also motivate your donors. We've seen time and time again that folks who either are not donors are more motivated to become donors when they know their gift is being doubled, or that donors are willing to give again when they know their gift is being doubled. And so, independent of the money that you receive from whoever is matching you or whatever entity is matching you, it's also motivating to your donors, and you get more from them. And finally, if the matcher is someone who is known to you, it gives you the opportunity to deepen their relationship with you and steward them. And so we'll explore each of these facets of a match and how to get the most out of each of them over the course of this little talk. The first question that you need to ask yourselves is how likely are you to unlock all of your matching funds during your campaign? This is the most important question, and it should dictate your strategy going forward. And by this, what I mean is if you have a $5,000 match, let's say, and over the course of NewsMatch, you typically get $30,000. It's not so much of a challenge of, well, how do we make sure we get that $5,000? Because you usually get 6 times that much, but it's how can we make the most out of this effect of doubling our donors' gifts. Conversely, if you have, let's say, a $10,000 match and last year in NewsMatch you made $9,000, it might be less about, how do we like pick and choose when to deploy it, and rather how can we make sure that we unlock the full 10,000 that we're eligible for. So as you're making this decision or thinking about how likely you are to unlock it, it might be really obvious. But if it's a little bit less clear, here's some data points that you can consider. Of course, the details of the match matter a great deal. A match that's $5,000 for any money that you receive during a 2-month time period is very different from a $5,000 match, but only for gifts that are created by lapsed donors. And so that is really important context as you're trying to understand this. So being clear on your matches details is key. The combination of your goal, what you want to achieve, and what you've historically achieved during NewsMatch or whichever campaign you're looking at are probably the best data points for thinking about how realistic is it to unlock this match, and do we need to use it at every opportunity or during select opportunities. So if you always make $10,000 during NewsMatch and you have a match of $10,000, you probably need to talk about it at every opportunity to get the most out of it. Whereas if you always exceed the amount of the match, you might need to deploy it more strategically. Your web growth or shrinkage in audience and your newsletter growth or declines in newsletter list are also relevant factors here. If you've grown your audience a ton, you might expect to make more money than you historically have. And other data points could use this as well. If you have qualitative data that your audience is more engaged or loyal, or you have quantitative data to that effect, that might change your expectations for fundraising. If you have more staff and you know that you have more bandwidth to fundraise than you have previously, you might think differently about what you're going to accomplish during this campaign, even if there's no, historical data or like web growth that would indicate that. So we're now going to talk about some of the ways that you can highlight your match. And again, if you need to use the entirety of your campaign to unlock the full potential of the match or the full value of the match, you're probably going to be using these tactics pretty consistently throughout your campaign. Whereas if it's a smaller match and you are either targeting it to specific people or limiting it to specific days or something like that, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but you're probably going to use the same tactics, just less frequently or in more specific situations. So, as we think about email, the subject line is, of course, the first opportunity that you have to communicate anything to your readers. And talking about the match is a great way to stand out from the crowd in the inbox. Here we can see this example from Inside Climate News on Earth Day 2024. And the matching language just makes it a lot more prominent in the inbox, which is valuable all the time because this is competitive real estate, but especially so during end of year when lots of organizations, not just newsrooms, are fundraising. And I mean, if you think about how many appeals you send and how many every organization sends on a day like Giving Tuesday, being able to say that your gift is matched is that much more valuable when there are all these different appeals that our readers are receiving. It also puts the match front and center. There's really no way to engage with these appeals without knowing that your gift is going to be matched. So the by putting it in the subject line, the reader immediately understands what's most important about this appeal. And as a bonus, I think that including a match it makes it easier to incorporate a tone of urgency into your appeals, which can be really valuable. We've seen that donors are very motivated by these more urgent messages. And because matches have, they're a finite in value and they have an end date, there's some built-in momentum or urgency that a match sort of enables you to use. Once we get into the email itself, that's, of course, not a time to stop talking about the match. But you have a lot of opportunities about how you want to talk about it. It could be that the match is the entirety of the appeal. In this example from the forward, the person who was matching the gifts actually signed and authored the appeal. Or it could be as simple as a PS. Maybe the appeal is about the impact of an investigative report that you did, and then there's just a little line at the end. By the way, don't forget all gifts that you make this news match are doubled. And of course, you could be somewhere in between where the main thrust of the match is about something relating to your newsroom or your expansion or your mission, but you're still weaving in that the gift is matched. Bolding language in general is very valuable in appeals because it makes them more skimmable. And so if that's something you're doing, I would really strongly recommend that you bold the mentions of the match as well so that people can't miss that that's an aspect of the campaign. And finally, you can even include it on the CTAs themselves. So we see here in this example, the button is saying, let me match your gift. And that is another place where you can highlight and call out that gifts are doubled. Everything I've been saying basically applies on the website as well. It's probably more effective on the website if your match is a general match, because in email you can segment, and if the match only applies to new donors, you can email folks and in most cases know if they are or not a donor. On the website, for most newsrooms, that's harder to know. And so it can be a little bit easier to talk about a match if it applies generally. But in general, if you have a match and it applies to the audience, you should be highlighting it. And so this is a strong example from CT Mirror of how they're talking about their match during one of their big annual fundraisers. Finally, the checkout page is the final place that your readers interact with before making a donation, and it's their final decision point. And this is a great place to reinforce that their gift is being matched or doubled or increased in some way when they're making this final decision to support you. The only caveat to this is that you want to provide a frictionless experience. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to donate. So you really do need to strike the balance between conveying and showing this important information about the match, but not making them read a novel of worth of information in order to complete their gift. And so I think that the Trace has done a really good job of conveying this and explaining it, but without detracting too much from the experience of checking out. So we've talked about some of the tactics that you can use to make sure that your audience is aware of your match and that it's as persuasive to the folks who are seeing it as possible. But I want to talk a little bit about scenarios where you don't anticipate that your match would cover like the entirety of your campaign, and you're not going to be using these tactics to all people at all times. Um, so if the match applies to all gifts, so it's just, the first 5,000 or like, $5,000 that you raise will be matched, and you just expect to raise more than that much money. I would consider using it on select days or for select segments first. And then if you're having trouble maxing it out, you, of course, can open it up and use it every day for the last week of your campaign or something like that. And the reason for this is because, like I was saying earlier, a match is really motivating to donors and it gets them to give. And so if you show the matching language first to non-donors, who are on average less likely to give than existing or lapsed donors, you might experience more of the benefit of the match with them than if you showed it to new donors who maybe they would have given, or excuse me, to existing donors who maybe would have given in, regardless of if there was a match during your campaign. Similarly, using it on special days to like really highlight Giving Tuesday, for example, could be an effective way to get the most out of your match. We'll talk a little bit more about special days on another slide. But if the match is more narrow, it's not applied to all gifts. Maybe it just applies to new donors or lapsed donors or something like that. This would be a case where I would be mentioning it frequently, but just to those segments. And so where I was saying that it might be a challenge to do that on the website, but it's much easier to do an email. So I would make sure that if, for example, our match applies to all gifts made by lapsed donors, I would make sure that every appeal that goes out to lapsed donors includes that there's language about the match. But we're really defining it based on the segment that's eligible to receive or to have their gifts matched. Sometimes you also have the opportunity to work with the person who's making the match to find a definition that works for you and meets your goals. That's certainly not always the case, but sometimes the match is the product of your communications and relationship with your donors. And so you could maybe define it as, we're really trying to grow our recurring gifts, and we really want to focus the match on recurring gifts. And if that works for the donor and it supports your goals, then you could use it in that way and have the match be focused on recurring gifts explicitly. So like I said, we were talking about special days. A special day like Giving Tuesday, or I've seen newsrooms do it for Black Friday, or before American Thanksgiving, or the last day of the year. These are obvious fits. They're already days where people are more inclined to give, and it can be a way to get more people over the finish line and also help you stand out on these crowded days of giving. But you can also create your own special days using the match. So we have this example from CT Mir here, where they had an ongoing match, but then on select days, they would include this what they called a lightning match, where there was an additional match, but only for that one day. And this was a way to give their campaign a boost, particularly sort of in between those big days of giving. So you could attach it to a special day, but you could also just sort of like fabricate one of your own and use the match as the reason for doing that, and sort of help out with one of those slower periods of the campaign. When we think about segments, whether it's that you're working with the matcher to define a segment that you want to target, or if you're just thinking about, who would this matching opportunity mean the most to, and that we have maybe the hardest time recruiting to give, or that we want to work the most on, these are some ideas that you could use, and then target your appeals that talk about the match to these segments as appropriate. Some common ones are lapsed donors. So you could say that all renewing gifts made by lapsed donors are matched to this campaign. new donors, so all gifts by brand new donors are matched. It could be that new recurring donors are is your focus, and so it doesn't matter if they were or were not a donor prior to this campaign, but if they're making a new recurring gift, you're matching it. It's oftentimes the case that organizations like to work with their matchers such that a monthly gift is matched at its annual value, which can make the impact of your gift all the greater. It could be that the segment you're targeting is existing donors and you want them to give an additional one-time gift or give again, and that's where you're targeting your match. Some less common ones might be readers of a specific newsletter. If you know that you've had a lot of newsletter growth on a list, but people who read it are not donors at a high rate, that may be where you're focusing your attention with the match, or even donors in a specific area. If you are trying to grow your readership in that area, if you can segment for location, you could even target your match in that way. So these are tactics that you can use if the details of your match allow it, or if you know that if you send messaging to your match to your entire audience for the entirety of your campaign, you'll easily unlock the full value of the match. You might start with one of these more specific segments that you know the match will really motivate them to give and where you want to see some growth. And then finally, that third sort of facet of a match is that you have this relationship with the person who's offering the match. Obviously, what that relationship looks like will vary for every organization, but this is an opportunity to deepen it. And so expressing gratitude to the matching donor continually, not just for when they offer it or when they make it at the end of the campaign, but an ongoing practice of gratitude is extremely valuable. You can reference one of our previous videos on stewarding donors for more ideas about how to do that. Keeping them in the loop is really valuable as well. Again, their gift is inspiring others to give, and so helping them see that transformative effect in action can be really valuable. So I would not just let the whole campaign go without them hearing from you, but these are opportunities to update them and not only thank them, but keep them in the know about what's happening. And you have the option to even bring them a little further into the fundraising process. We looked at that example from the forward where the appeal was from the person matching the gift. So you could do something like that, or you could encourage them and even give them copy or resources to reach out to their own networks to sort of fundraise on your behalf. You know that this person is very, very interested in your work and wants to support it. And this is another way you can do it, and they can do it and deepen their relationship. So that is all we have. But if you have questions, please refer them to NewsMatch. And otherwise, continue to check out our videos, and best of luck this NewsMatch season.